What if everything you've been taught about one of Christianity's most misunderstood figures was deliberately fabricated to hide a profound spiritual truth? The story of Mary Magdalene stands as perhaps the most significant example of historical manipulation in religious history, a calculated erasure designed to remove the divine feminine from Christianity's origins. When we examine the traditional portrayal of Mary Magdalene, we're presented with a reformed prostitute, a woman defined primarily by her sins and subsequent redemption. But what if this familiar narrative is actually a masterful deception perpetuated for nearly 2 millennia? The implications would shake the very foundations of Western spirituality. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, accessed extraordinary information during his trance states that challenges everything conventional history tells us. Through his connection to what he termed the Akashic records, an ethereal library containing all human experience, Cayce unveiled a radically different portrait of Mary Magdalene, not as a peripheral character in need of salvation, but as a highly initiated spiritual adept who understood Christ's most esoteric teachings at levels even his closest male disciples couldn't comprehend. Has this ever wondered why, throughout history, powerful feminine spiritual figures have been systematically diminished, demonized, or erased? The transformation of Mary Magdalene from spiritual leader to fallen woman wasn't a simple misunderstanding or translation error. It represents a deliberate strategy to establish male-dominated religious hierarchies that continue to shape our world today. The evidence Cayce uncovered suggests that Mary Magdalene had undergone extensive training in ancient mystery traditions long before meeting Jesus. She wasn't spiritually inferior. She was his equal partner, the embodiment of the sacred feminine principle that balanced his masculine wisdom. Their relationship wasn't just a teacher and follower, but a divine partnership representing the perfect union of complementary spiritual energies. Stay with me throughout this journey, because what we're about to explore goes far beyond correcting a historical inaccuracy. It reveals how the systematic suppression of Mary Magdalene's true identity created a profound spiritual imbalance that continues to affect our collective consciousness today. What you're about to discover might fundamentally transform your understanding of early Christianity, sacred relationships, and the role of feminine wisdom in spiritual evolution. The forbidden gospel of Mary Magdalene doesn't just restore her rightful place in history, it offers us a glimpse of what a spirituality balanced between masculine and feminine principles might look like. If you're fascinated by these hidden spiritual truths, hit subscribe now to join our community of seekers uncovering what history tried to erase. According to Cayce's revelations, Mary Magdalene wasn't merely someone Jesus rescued from a life of sin. She was already a spiritual adept who had undergone rigorous initiation in the ancient mystery schools of Egypt long before their paths crossed. These esoteric traditions taught sacred geometry, cosmic wisdom, and energetic healing practices that few individuals had access to. This hidden dimension of Mary's background transforms our entire understanding of their relationship. She wasn't spiritually inferior to Jesus, but brought her own profound wisdom to their partnership. What's particularly revealing about this perspective is how it illuminates a much larger pattern throughout Western civilization, the systematic erasure of feminine spiritual authority. This wasn't unique to Mary Magdalene, but represents a fundamental shift that occurred as patriarchal religious structures solidified their power. Consider how many feminine spiritual figures throughout history have been diminished, demonized, or recast as secondary to their male counterparts. The divine feminine wasn't just marginalized, it was deliberately removed from our spiritual inheritance. The transformation of Mary Magdalene's image throughout history reveals one of the most significant cover-ups in religious history. What's fascinating is how deliberately her true identity was obscured. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great delivered a sermon where he conflated Mary Magdalene with an unnamed sinful woman mentioned elsewhere in the Gospels. With this single rhetorical move, her identity as a spiritual leader was replaced with the image of a repentant prostitute, a narrative that would persist for nearly 1,400 years. Think about that journey for a moment. A woman who stood witness at the crucifixion, who was the first to see the resurrected Christ, reduced to a footnote, a cautionary tale about redemption. The question we should all be asking is why? What threatened the established order so much about Mary Magdalene's actual role? The revelations from texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary tell a different story entirely. These documents portray her as Jesus' most trusted confidant, someone who received special teachings and spiritual knowledge. In the Gospel of Mary, the male disciples even approach her for guidance after Jesus' death, acknowledging her superior understanding of his message. Behind the scenes of this historical reframing was a power struggle that shaped Christianity as we know it today. The early church was establishing its hierarchical structure, one that placed men in positions of authority. Mary Magdalene represented a different path, one where spiritual insight and closeness to Jesus determined leadership, not gender. This alternative vision had to be suppressed for the patriarchal structure to solidify its control. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining the specific texts that reveal Mary's true importance. The Gospel of Philip refers to her as Jesus' companion, using a term that some scholars believe indicated a spousal relationship. Meanwhile, the Gospel of Mary contains a fascinating exchange where Peter, seemingly jealous, questions whether Jesus would really prefer Mary over the male disciples, showing the tension that existed even then about her prominent role. If any part of this resonates with your understanding of spiritual history, write enlightened perspective in the comments. The story of Mary Magdalene isn't just about correcting historical records, it's about understanding how narratives shape our perceptions of who can lead, who can teach, and whose spiritual insights we value. What emerges from these suppressed Gnostic texts is nothing short of revolutionary for our understanding of early Christianity. The Gospel of Mary contains passages where the male disciples, confused about Jesus' more esoteric teachings after his departure, turn to Mary Magdalene for clarity and guidance. This revelation completely transforms the power dynamic we've been taught to accept. In one particularly telling scene, after Mary shares profound spiritual insights she received directly from Jesus, Peter asks, "Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us?" This moment of jealousy and disbelief reveals the tension that existed even then regarding her spiritual authority. Yet what's most revealing is that Levi defends Mary against Peter's criticism, acknowledging that Jesus loved her more than us because he recognized her superior spiritual understanding. This hidden truth exposes the profound transformation that occurred as Christianity evolved from a mystical movement into an institutional religion. Behind Mary Magdalene's historical reframing was a calculated decision about which version of Christianity would prevail. The path she represented, one based on direct mystical experience, inner knowledge, and spiritual equality, directly threatened the emerging church hierarchy that required clear lines of authority flowing downward from male leadership positions. Her approach to spirituality wasn't just different, it was fundamentally incompatible with the institutional model being constructed. Mary embodied a journey of transformation that prioritized personal revelation over institutional authority, direct experience over dogmatic belief. This alternative vision of spiritual leadership had to be neutralized for the patriarchal structure to solidify its control over Christian doctrine and practice. The impact of this distortion rippled through centuries, creating a spiritual inheritance that was profoundly imbalanced. Women seeking leadership roles in spiritual communities found themselves without a powerful biblical precedent that had actually existed but was deliberately obscured. The revelation of this hidden history reveals not just a historical injustice, but a fundamental reshaping of Western spiritual consciousness. What's particularly striking is how long this misrepresentation persisted. It wasn't until 1969, nearly 14 centuries, after Pope Gregory's fateful sermon, that the Vatican finally acknowledged this historical error, officially separating Mary Magdalene from the unnamed sinful woman. This correction was made with minimal fanfare, no public apology, and little acknowledgement of the immense damage done to her legacy and to women's spiritual authority throughout Christian history. Subscribe to continue our journey into the forgotten wisdom traditions that transform how we understand spirituality today. Now, I want to go even deeper into this hidden dimension by exploring what Mary's actual teachings might have contained. The fragmentary texts that survived the systematic purging of non-canonical writings give us tantalizing glimpses of a spiritual approach focused on inner awakening rather than external authority, a path that might have completely transformed how Christianity developed had it not been suppressed. If you're beginning to see how this historical manipulation might have affected your own understanding of spirituality, write "veils lifted" in the comments. The truth is, this wasn't just a casual omission by absent-minded scribes. Mary Magdalene's diminishment was a calculated decision that transformed the trajectory of spiritual practice in the Western world. When we examine ancient Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary, we discover something profound. She wasn't just another follower, but rather Jesus' most beloved disciple and possibly his intimate partner. The Gospel of Philip uses terminology that's particularly revealing, referring to Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion, a word that many scholars believe indicated a spousal relationship in the context of the time. This revelation doesn't just challenge our conventional understanding of Jesus' life. It fundamentally transforms how we might view the entire spiritual framework of Christianity. Imagine how different Western spirituality might have developed if it had retained the sacred marriage at its core, instead of elevating celibacy as the spiritual ideal. The deliberate removal of this relationship from the canonical narrative wasn't merely about controlling historical facts. It was about controlling the very blueprint of spiritual development that would shape Western consciousness for millennia. The spiritual implications of this revelation run deeper than most realize. Mary Magdalene embodied the sacred feminine, a powerful energy that balances the masculine aspects of divinity. This concept was threatening to the emerging church hierarchy that sought to establish a patriarchal power structure. Her removal from prominence wasn't just about erasing a woman. It was about severing our connection to half of our spiritual nature. What's particularly fascinating is how this suppression created ripple effects through history. The sacred feminine didn't disappear. It went underground. We see it resurface in mystical traditions, in the veneration of Black Madonnas. Across Europe, in goddess worship that persisted despite official doctrine. The feminine divine continued to call to us through the centuries, speaking to something essential within the human spirit that couldn't be fully extinguished. This understanding completely reframes the foundations of Christian spirituality. Rather than a hierarchical system where divine wisdom flows downward from male authority figures, we might instead envision a circular model where masculine and feminine energies complement and enhance each other. Mary and Jesus potentially embodied this balance, the sacred marriage of complementary divine forces. When we reconcile with this hidden truth, we begin to heal the wounded aspect of our collective spiritual inheritance. We recover balance, we restore wholeness. The journey to reclaim Mary Magdalene isn't about diminishing Jesus or challenging faith. It's about completing the picture, restoring what was intentionally removed from our spiritual tapestry. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring Mary's spiritual journey before she even met Jesus. This is where the narrative truly transforms our understanding. Historical and apocryphal texts suggest she was already a spiritual adept with profound mystical knowledge. Some traditions indicate she was trained in Egyptian mystery schools, versed in sacred geometry and cosmic wisdom. If this perspective on Mary Magdalene as an already spiritually powerful figure before meeting Jesus resonates with you, write "Sacred Balance Restored" in the comments. This wasn't a prostitute being saved by a male savior. This was a priestess bringing her own divine gifts to a spiritual partnership. According to Cayce's psychic readings, Mary Magdalene had undergone intensive training in the Egyptian mystery schools long before her paths crossed with Jesus. These ancient institutions preserved wisdom traditions dating back thousands of years, teaching initiates sacred geometry, cosmic principles and methods of consciousness transformation that few individuals in that era could access. Mary's background in these esoteric traditions gave her an extraordinary spiritual foundation, one that prepared her to recognize and understand Jesus' most profound teachings when others couldn't grasp their deeper significance. She brought her own mystical knowledge to their relationship, creating a partnership of equals rather than the hierarchical teacher-student dynamic we've been taught to envision. The relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, as revealed through Cayce's insights, represents what mystics throughout history have called the sacred marriage, or hieros gamos, the union of complementary divine energies that creates a perfect spiritual balance. This wasn't merely a personal relationship, but a cosmic template demonstrating how masculine and feminine spiritual principles work together to create wholeness. Imagine a spiritual paradigm built not on hierarchy and authority, but on this model of balance and partnership. Instead of spiritual wisdom flowing downward from male authority figures to passive recipients, we might envision a circular model where masculine and feminine energies dance together, each enhancing and completing the other. This alternative vision of spirituality wasn't just different from what eventually emerged, it was revolutionary. The deliberate removal of this balanced model from Christian tradition created a profound wound in our collective spiritual inheritance. When half of the divine equation was systematically erased, we lost access to essential wisdom about integration, receptivity, and embodied spirituality. The consequences of this imbalance can be traced through centuries of Western history, manifesting in our relationship with nature, with our bodies, and with spiritual authority itself. The journey to reclaim Mary Magdalene's true role isn't about diminishing Jesus or challenging faith. It's about restoring wholeness to a spiritual tradition that has been operating with only half of its original wisdom. It's about healing a division that never should have occurred. When we integrate what was deliberately removed, we don't weaken Christianity. We restore its original power and transformative potential. This revelation about Mary Magdalene invites us to question what other vital spiritual truths might have been obscured throughout history. What other wisdom has been waiting in the shadows, ready to be rediscovered when we're finally prepared to see with fresh eyes. The pattern of suppressing feminine wisdom wasn't unique to Christianity, but has appeared throughout many spiritual and philosophical traditions in the West. Now, I want to go even deeper into what these rediscovered texts reveal about Mary Magdalene's actual teachings and how they might still be relevant to spiritual seekers today. Her approach to spirituality contains insights that speak directly to the fragmentation many people experience in contemporary spiritual life. If anything I've shared has resonated with your understanding of spiritual history, write "Wisdom Uncovered" in the comments below. In reality, the transformation of Mary Magdalene's image throughout history reveals one of the most essential hidden truths about spiritual authority in the ancient world. When we look behind the ecclesiastical curtain, what we find is a deliberate campaign to obscure her significance that lasted for centuries. Consider this revelation. Prior to being labeled a repentant prostitute, Magdalene held immense spiritual influence. The decision to reframe her identity wasn't simply a misunderstanding. It was a calculated effort to dismantle female spiritual leadership. This matters because the impact of this historical revision continues to echo in our understanding of spirituality today. Cayce's journey into ancient texts unveiled something even more profound. Magdalene appears to have been part of a spiritual lineage that predated even the formal teachings we associate with early Christianity. The evidence suggests she wasn't just a follower, but a bearer of wisdom from mystery traditions that emphasized direct spiritual experience over hierarchical authority. What's particularly fascinating is how these esoteric teachings threatened established power structures. Imagine a spiritual path that emphasized personal revelation over institutional control. This was precisely what made Magdalene's position so revolutionary and ultimately so dangerous to those consolidating religious authority. The texts Cayce examined point to Magdalene possessing knowledge of specific initiation rituals, meditation practices, and symbolic interpretations that were typically reserved for those who had undergone years of spiritual preparation. These weren't casual teachings, but carefully guarded wisdom traditions passed through generations of spiritual adepts. When we dive deeper into this perspective, we begin to see why her story needed to be rewritten. A woman with direct spiritual authority teaching practices of inner transformation outside institutional control represented a fundamental challenge to the emerging church hierarchy. The decision to recast her as morally compromised and in need of salvation was a strategic move to undermine her teachings rather than engage with them. The real story of Mary Magdalene isn't just about historical accuracy. It's about recognizing how spiritual narratives shape our understanding of authority and transformation. By recovering her authentic role, we aren't simply correcting the record. We're opening ourselves to a more nuanced understanding of spiritual lineages that value direct experience alongside textual tradition. What's remarkable is that despite centuries of misrepresentation, fragments of her original teachings continued to surface in various spiritual traditions across the Mediterranean world. These persistent echoes suggest her influence was too profound to be completely erased, even by the most determined efforts at revisionist history. Now, I want to go even deeper into what these rediscovered texts reveal about Magdalene's actual teachings and how they might still be relevant to spiritual seekers today. If anything I've shared has resonated with your understanding of spiritual history, write "Wisdom Uncovered" in the comments below. Their souls danced across the tapestry of existence long before their well-documented meeting. In biblical times, this wasn't just a chance encounter between a spiritual teacher and his follower. It was a cosmic reunion of twin flames whose connection transcended the boundaries of a single lifetime. According to Cayce's remarkable insights, Mary Magdalene and Jesus had shared numerous incarnations together, each time advancing their shared spiritual mission across the vast expanse of cosmic time. Their meeting in first-century Palestine wasn't the beginning of their story, but rather another chapter in an ancient spiritual partnership that had unfolded across multiple planes of existence. Despite the relentless efforts to erase Mary Magdalene's wisdom, her teachings proved too profound to be completely obliterated from human consciousness. Like an underground river flowing beneath the surface of official doctrine, fragments of her spiritual insights continued to emerge in various mystical traditions across the Mediterranean world. We see echoes of her approach in Gnostic communities, in early Christian mystical orders, and even in certain Sufi practices that emphasize direct spiritual experience over dogmatic adherence. The attempts to silence her voice paradoxically revealed how powerful that voice truly was, too authentic and transformative to be contained by institutional boundaries. Mary Magdalene's psychic abilities weren't merely parlor tricks or the fabrications of later storytellers. She possessed a genuine clairvoyance that allowed her to perceive the unseen currents of reality that remained invisible to others. This gift wasn't separate from her spirituality, but deeply intertwined with it, providing her with insights that even some of Jesus's closest disciples struggled to comprehend. The depth of her spiritual understanding was remarkable for her time. While many religious followers focused on external rituals and literal interpretations, Mary Magdalene grasped the esoteric underpinnings of Jesus's teachings. She understood that the kingdom of heaven wasn't just a future promise or distant realm, but a state of consciousness accessible through inner transformation. This profound connection created a unique dynamic between them, one where words were often unnecessary. Historical accounts that were deliberately suppressed speak of moments when Mary would complete Jesus's thoughts or explain his parables to confused listeners, revealing the intimate spiritual harmony they shared. Their bond represents something far more significant than a mere historical footnote. It embodies the sacred masculine and feminine principles in perfect alignment, a blueprint for spiritual partnership that transcends conventional relationships. This divine balance wasn't about dominance or submission, but about complementary energies creating something greater than their individual parts. Now, I want to go even deeper into this hidden dimension of their relationship. The mystical traditions preserved in certain Gnostic texts suggest that Jesus and Mary engaged in sacred ceremonies that activated higher states of consciousness. These weren't the standardized rituals that would later define organized Christianity, but direct experiential practices designed to elevate the human spirit into communion with the divine. If this revelation about Jesus and Mary Magdalene's multi-lifetime connection resonates with you, write in the comments, "Soul connections transcend time." What's particularly fascinating about Mary Magdalene's spiritual journey is how she understood Jesus's teachings on a level that transcended the literal interpretations common among his other followers. While many disciples focused on the external rules and rituals of religious practice, Mary recognized that when Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven, he wasn't referring to a physical location or future reward. Through her advanced mystical training, she grasped that he was describing an accessible state of consciousness, a transformation of perception that allows one to experience divine reality here and now. This profound insight represents a completely different approach to spirituality than what eventually became Orthodox Christianity. Instead of postponing spiritual fulfillment to an afterlife or distant future, Mary understood Jesus's core message as an invitation to immediate awakening through inner transformation. The fragmentary texts that survived the purges of non-canonical writings reveal how she taught others to Recognize divine presence within ordinary reality, rather than seeking it exclusively through institutional channels. The relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus represents what mystical traditions throughout history have called sacred marriage, the perfect balance and integration of masculine and feminine spiritual principles. This wasn't about gender roles in the conventional sense, but rather about complementary energies that, when brought into harmony, create a state of spiritual wholeness. Jesus embodied the transformative, outward-directed masculine principle, while Mary carried the receptive, intuitive feminine wisdom tradition. Together, they demonstrated a model of spiritual partnership based on equality and complementarity rather than dominance and submission. Cayce's psychic readings revealed something even more remarkable about their spiritual practices. Beyond the public teachings recorded in canonical texts, Jesus and Mary engaged in sacred ceremonies designed to activate expanded states of consciousness. These weren't the standardized rituals that would later characterize institutional Christianity, but direct experiential practices drawing from ancient mystery traditions. Through specific breathwork, sacred sounds, and energetic transmissions, they created ceremonial contexts where participants could directly experience divine presence rather than simply learning about it conceptually. What makes this particularly significant is how it transforms our understanding of early Christianity. Rather than beginning as a set of beliefs or theological positions, the original movement appears to have been a practical path of consciousness transformation. The ceremonies Mary and Jesus conducted created experiential gateways to mystical awareness, a dimension of their teaching that was systematically removed as Christianity evolved into an institutional religion focused more on correct belief than direct experience. This hidden wisdom wasn't intended to remain secret forever. According to Cayce's readings, both Jesus and Mary understood that aspects of their teaching would go underground during a long period of spiritual winter, but they planted seeds of mystical understanding that would eventually resurface when humanity was ready to embrace a more balanced spiritual paradigm. Now, I want to go even deeper into the specific techniques and practices that Mary Magdalene taught her own circle of initiates, approaches to spiritual awakening that emphasize direct experience over theological doctrine, inner knowing over external authority. If you're finding that this perspective on Jesus and Mary's relationship as sacred partners resonates with something you've intuitively sensed, but perhaps never heard articulated, write "Inner Wisdom Awakened" in the comments. Her presence challenged religious hierarchies in profound ways, demonstrating that the natural right to divine connection belongs to all beings, regardless of gender. Mary Magdalene embodied this truth through her unwavering commitment to her spiritual path, even when faced with tremendous opposition. This wasn't merely a historical disagreement, it was a pivotal moment that shaped the spiritual journey of Western civilization. What's particularly revealing about this spiritual power struggle is how thoroughly the feminine perspective was systematically removed from the narrative. Imagine making decisions about your life's path while only having access to half of the wisdom available. That's essentially what happened as patriarchal systems consolidated their control over spiritual teachings. The suppression of feminine spiritual power has indeed deprived humanity of balanced spiritual perspectives for centuries. This absence created a spiritual blind spot in our collective consciousness that we're only now beginning to recognize and heal. The divine feminine represents intuition, receptivity, nurturing wisdom, and cyclical understanding of life. Qualities essential for spiritual wholeness, but often dismissed as secondary or irrelevant in traditional religious frameworks. Looking at this imbalance from a transformational perspective, we can see how it's affected every aspect of society. From how we relate to each other to how we treat the natural world when we lack the feminine principle in our spiritual foundation. We tend to overvalue hierarchical structures, linear thinking, and domination rather than cooperation and interconnection. Mary Magdalene's story offers a profound revelation about what a more balanced spiritual path might look like. Her journey wasn't about replacing one extreme with another, but integrating complementary energies for a more complete understanding of divinity. The recent resurgence of interest in her teachings reflects a collective recognition that something essential has been missing from our spiritual inheritance. This spiritual recalibration isn't just academic. It has practical implications for how we navigate our inner worlds and outer relationships. By reclaiming the wisdom of Mary Magdalene and other feminine spiritual teachers, we're not just correcting historical inaccuracies, we're accessing dormant aspects of our spiritual potential that have remained hidden in plain sight. What truly stands out in her story is her embodiment of spiritual autonomy, the radical notion that one's relationship with the divine doesn't require intermediaries or permission. This fundamental truth threatened established power structures then, and in many ways it still does today. Mary taught that true spiritual transformation doesn't come from following external rules or rituals, but through inner awakening and direct connection with divine presence. While organized religion often focused on controlling behavior through laws and regulations, her approach emphasized awakening the divine spark already present within each person. Now I want to go even deeper into why this recovery of Mary Magdalene's true role matters so profoundly in our current moment. Her teachings offer powerful insights that speak directly to the spiritual challenges we face in modern times. If any of this resonates with your own spiritual journey, write "Wisdom Reclaimed" in the comments below. Mary Magdalene's story isn't just ancient history, it's a profound revelation about truth's resilience. The systematic erasure of her narrative from mainstream Christianity represents one of history's most consequential spiritual cover-ups. Yet, despite centuries of suppression, her story continued to resurface through hidden texts, artistic representations, and persistent oral traditions that couldn't be fully extinguished. This pattern reveals something fundamental about spiritual truth. It cannot be permanently buried. When Cayce began receiving his visions, he encountered this same resilience. Messages that had been waiting centuries to be rediscovered, truths that refused to remain hidden, despite powerful forces working against them. The journey toward understanding Mary Magdalene's actual role requires a willingness to question established narratives. Many scholars now acknowledge that early church fathers deliberately minimized female spiritual leadership to align with the patriarchal structures of their time. This revelation isn't just academic. It represents a profound transformation in how we might understand the very foundations of Christian teaching. Cayce's experience mirrors what many seekers encounter when they begin exploring beyond conventional religious boundaries. The initial discomfort gives way to a deeper recognition that questioning inherited beliefs isn't an act of rebellion, but rather a return to something more authentic. The hidden truth is that our spiritual heritage is far richer, more inclusive, and more empowering than many traditional interpretations suggest. What makes Mary Magdalene's story so compelling is not just historical justice, but its immediate relevance to our personal spiritual journeys. Her narrative reminds us that authentic spirituality often exists in tension with institutional power. The marginalization she experienced, being recast as a reformed prostitute rather than recognized as a spiritual leader, reflects a pattern we still see today when voices challenging established religious authorities face dismissal or discrediting. The evidence points to a deliberate campaign by early church authorities to minimize the role of women in general and Mary Magdalene in particular. This wasn't isolated, but part of a broader pattern of removing women from positions of spiritual authority to conform with the patriarchal social structures of the Greco-Roman world. Documents that emphasized Mary's spiritual leadership or presented alternative models of authority based on spiritual insight rather than gender or hierarchy were systematically excluded from the canonical texts. Yet even as official doctrine was being codified to exclude her voice, Mary's spiritual wisdom continued to flow through underground channels. We see her influence in Gnostic communities, in medieval mystical orders, and in the persistent veneration of the divine feminine that surfaced repeatedly throughout Christian history despite official suppression. The transformation that occurred from a balanced spiritual path honoring both masculine and feminine wisdom to one dominated by masculine perspectives created a profound imbalance in Western spirituality that we're only now beginning to recognize and address. Now, I want to go even deeper into how recognizing Mary Magdalene's true role fundamentally transforms our understanding of Jesus' ministry and early Christianity. This isn't about replacing one dogma with another, but rather expanding our perspective to embrace a more complete picture of our spiritual heritage. If you're finding yourself reconsidering aspects of the Christian narrative you've always taken for granted, type "awakening" in the comments below. Her story invites reconsideration of spirituality, religious power, and feminine wisdom. Mary Magdalene's historical redemption symbolizes a broader spiritual awakening, one that continues to unfold in our collective consciousness even today. What's particularly fascinating is how the techniques used to undermine Mary's spiritual authority still operate in our world. When voices challenge established religious narratives, they often face the same pattern of character assassination, dismissal, and reframing that Mary experienced. Her marginalization wasn't just an ancient injustice, but a blueprint that continues to shape how spiritual orthodoxy responds to threatening perspectives. These religious stereotypes weren't just harmless traditions, they represented a domination mechanism that needed Mary Magdalene removed from the story. Cayce's deep dive into this hidden history reveals how Mary's powerful position as Christ's spiritual confidant creates profound implications for how we understand spiritual authority today. Mary Magdalene wasn't just following Jesus, she was his equal partner in the mission. Think about this transformation in perspective. The woman who patriarchal traditions reduced to a reformed prostitute was actually a wealthy, educated woman who funded much of Jesus' ministry and stood as his intellectual and spiritual counterpart. The impact of this revelation cannot be overstated. What's particularly fascinating is the decision by early church fathers to systematically diminish her role. While Peter and the other male disciples are portrayed as struggling to understand Jesus' deeper teachings, the Gnostic Gospels show Mary grasping the mystical dimensions of Christ's message with remarkable clarity. This created a tension within the early movement about whose interpretation would prevail. Cayce explained how Mary represented a more mystical, experiential approach to spirituality that threatened institutional control. The journey from apostle to prostitute wasn't accidental. It was calculated to undermine her authority and the feminine divine principle she embodied. Behind the scenes of canonical Bible formation, real battles were fought over whose version of Christianity would survive. The courage Mary showed at the crucifixion speaks volumes about her commitment. While male disciples fled in fear, she remained present, witnessing Christ's suffering. This steadfast loyalty continued to the tomb, making her the first witness to the resurrection, a credential that should have established her as a foundational church authority. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how Mary's actual teachings differed from the institutional Christianity that emerged. The Gnostic texts reveal a spirituality focused on inner knowing rather than external authority, a distinction with profound consequences for how believers relate to the divine. If you've had moments where you felt the divine was speaking directly to you without needing an intermediary or institution, write in the comments, "I understand Mary's way." The significance of their relationship reaches far beyond what conventional religious teaching often portrays. When we recognize Mary Magdalene and Jesus as spiritual equals, we begin to understand an entirely different dimension of early Christianity, one where the feminine divine was honored alongside the masculine. This spiritual partnership represents a profound balance that was later systematically erased from mainstream religious narratives. Mary Magdalene's role as a channel for divine revelation is particularly fascinating. Historical texts suggest she received spiritual insights directly, often communicating wisdom that even the male disciples struggled to comprehend. The Gospel of Mary, though fragmentary, reveals moments where she consoles and instructs the apostles after Jesus' death, showing her deep spiritual authority within their community. This revelation transforms how we might view the foundations of Christian spirituality. Rather than a hierarchy with Jesus at the top and followers below, we glimpse a more circular model of spiritual leadership where feminine wisdom worked in harmony with masculine teaching. Their relationship embodied the sacred union of opposites, the divine marriage of complementary energies that creates wholeness. The journey to understanding their true connection requires us to peel back layers of historical manipulation. When powerful church authorities established the canonical Gospels, they systematically diminished female spiritual leadership, creating a patriarchal structure that served political purposes rather than spiritual truth. This hidden reality explains why Mary's Gospels and teachings were actively suppressed. They represented a path of spiritual equality that threatened established power structures. The Gospel of Philip contains one of the most controversial passages about their relationship, stating that Jesus loved Mary Magdalene more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her mouth. While modern readers might interpret this through a romantic lens, scholars suggest this represents something profoundly different in the context of mystery traditions. The kiss symbolized the direct transmission of spiritual breath or wisdom, a sacred practice where teachings were passed from teacher to student through close proximity. This intimacy wasn't primarily physical, but represented a direct transfer of consciousness and spiritual understanding that bypassed the limitations of words. What makes Mary's teachings particularly revolutionary is their emphasis on inner knowing rather than external authority. She taught that the Son of Man is within you, suggesting that divine connection doesn't require institutional mediation, but emerges through self-knowledge and inner awakening. This approach to spirituality challenged the very foundation of religious hierarchies by suggesting that each person could access divine wisdom directly through contemplative practice, rather than relying on authorized interpreters or institutional structures. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what this spiritual partnership actually looked like in practice. The fragments we have suggest Jesus and Mary Magdalene shared teaching responsibilities, with her often translating his more cryptic messages into practical wisdom. She appears to have been particularly gifted at bridging the mystical with the everyday, helping others integrate spiritual insights into their lives. If you're beginning to recognize how this hidden dimension of early Christianity resonates with your own spiritual intuitions, write "Inner Wisdom Speaks" in the comments. Their connection represents something far more profound than what's commonly portrayed in religious education. Cayce's readings reveal that Jesus and Mary Magdalene embodied perfectly complementary spiritual energies, a sacred balance that created something greater than either could manifest alone. Jesus represented the divine masculine principle, the transformative, outward-directed energy focused on challenging existing structures and expanding consciousness through direct teaching. Mary Magdalene carried the sacred feminine tradition, the receptive, intuitive wisdom that recognized patterns, preserved essential knowledge, and created spaces for inner transformation to occur. This partnership wasn't just personal, it represented a cosmic template for spiritual wholeness. The masculine, without the feminine, becomes disconnected from its roots, creating transformation without nurturing what emerges. The feminine without the masculine can preserve wisdom, but may lack the catalyst for evolution and growth. Together, they created a perfect spiritual circuit, demonstrating how these complementary energies could work in harmony rather than opposition. Mary's extraordinary spiritual perception played a crucial role in the resurrection narrative. Her ability to witness the risen Christ wasn't coincidental but essential to her spiritual function. When she approached the tomb that morning, her heightened awareness allowed her to perceive beyond the physical veil, recognizing the transformation occurring at levels invisible to ordinary consciousness. This explains why she was uniquely positioned to be the first witness to the resurrection. She could literally see what others couldn't yet comprehend. Throughout wisdom traditions, we find this pattern of initiates whose spiritual sensitivity serves as a bridge between realms. Mary's perception wasn't supernatural in the sense of breaking natural law. Rather, she had cultivated an awareness that allowed her to recognize what was always present but invisible to untrained consciousness. This revelation challenges our understanding of what it means to perceive truth. Her ability to witness the resurrection emerged from years of spiritual preparation and practice, not simply as a random blessing or miracle. The Gnostic texts reveal Mary Magdalene's exceptional courage during the crucifixion. While the male disciples fled in fear of persecution, she remained present, bearing witness to Jesus' suffering with unwavering commitment. This wasn't just emotional loyalty but spiritual presence, the capacity to stay conscious and open-hearted even in the face of profound pain and apparent failure. Her steadfastness, when others abandoned, their teacher speaks volumes about her spiritual development and the depth of her understanding of the cosmic process unfolding through these events. One of Mary's most remarkable gifts was her ability to translate Jesus' abstract and often cryptic teachings into practical wisdom that others could understand and apply. While Jesus frequently spoke in parables and metaphysical concepts, Mary had a particular talent for grounding these esoteric ideas in everyday reality. She served as a bridge between mystical revelation and practical application, helping people integrate spiritual insights into their daily lives and relationships. This gift for translation made the spiritual path accessible to a much wider audience than would have been possible through Jesus' teaching alone. Now, I want to explore how Mary Magdalene's tension with the apostles reveals a profound dimension of early Christianity that completely transforms our understanding of the movement's original dynamics. The fragments that survived systematic purging show that her relationship with the other disciples, particularly Peter, was far more complex and revealing than traditional narratives suggest. If you're beginning to recognize how this balanced approach to spirituality might heal divisions in your own life or spiritual practice, write "Wholeness Remembered" in the comments. Mary Magdalene's story isn't just ancient history, it's a powerful invitation to reclaim the spiritual wholeness that was deliberately hidden from us. The revelations uncovered through Edgar Cayce's work offer us a glimpse into what Christianity might have been had the divine feminine not been systematically erased from its foundations. This journey of rediscovery, isn't just about correcting historical records, but about healing the deep spiritual imbalance that continues to shape our collective consciousness. As you reflect on what we've explored today, consider how this alternative understanding of Mary Magdalene might transform your own spiritual perspective. Does the idea of direct spiritual connection without institutional mediation resonate with your own experiences? Does the balance of masculine and feminine spiritual principles speak to something you've intuitively sensed was missing? The process of reclaiming Mary Magdalene's wisdom isn't complete. It's an ongoing journey that each of us participates in whenever we honor both the transcendent and immanent aspects of spirituality, whenever we value inner knowing alongside traditional teaching, whenever we recognize that spiritual authority can flow through any vessel, regardless of gender. If this exploration has illuminated something meaningful for you, take a moment to write "Hidden Wisdom Revealed" in the comments. Your voice becomes part of this collective rediscovery, adding to the chorus that's helping restore balance to our spiritual inheritance. I'd be grateful if you'd support this channel with a like. It helps these forgotten truths reach others who might be searching for the missing pieces in their own spiritual journeys. And if you haven't already subscribed, join our community of seekers as we continue exploring the sacred truths that have been hidden in plain sight throughout history. I've created another video that examines how other powerful feminine spiritual figures have been misunderstood throughout history. You'll find fascinating parallels to Mary Magdalene's story. Click right here and let's continue uncovering these hidden spiritual treasures together.